Friends, today is the day. We're doing bulbs, man. Bulbs are one of those things that are just hotly talked about this time of year. But what I feel like is missing is really like depth of topic. So, what I want to do is I'm only going to hit on the basics very, very briefly. But what I want to dive into more is how we are designing our bulb display. This is not just like how deep to plant it, when to plant it. No, 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 my friends. These are my top 5 tips for planning an incredible bulb display that is going to produce upwards of 7 months of color in your garden. And that is impact, my friends. That is impact. At the very end, I'm also going to dive through what I currently have planted and what is in my shopping cart that I will be adding this year. Okay, buckle up. Here we go. So let's get some just like nuts and bolts things out of the way. So first and foremost, your planting window for bulbs is when the soil has begun to cool to about 55 to 60 degrees. That's just like a good basic number for any bulb that we're planting in the ground. The other thing that we need to consider is our chill period, right? So zones 9 and higher, this is going to be where you need to search out pre-chilled bulbs. A lot of suppliers will specialize in them. However, those in the cooler zones, we just need to ensure that our bulbs have 12 to upwards of 16 weeks, depending on the bulb, to get that proper chill so that they send out a gorgeous floral display in the spring. Now, if you need information on how to chill bulbs at home, my friend Janey over on Dig Plant Water Repeat has a ton of amazing coverage for those of you in warmer zones. So you are not lost, but I am not your expert in the chill at home arena. So at the Northwest Flower and Garden Festival this past year, I gave a talk on the dynamic garden. And a dynamic garden is one that just lives, eats, and breathes changes. And honestly, I think that's such a beautiful thing. However, if you are someone who maybe lives in a condo or is someone who are just like, nope, I am like solidly in shrub territory. I like my evergreens. I like everything to be pretty uniform. You can still lean into the bulb game and generate upwards of 7 months of seasonal color and interest in your home garden. So I wanted to just kind of go over the variety of bulbs that are on the table for us to enjoy at this time. Now, when you go shopping for bulbs, you're going to see them divided into fall planted bulbs and spring planted bulbs. And I think in the spring, we get so carried away with all the perennials that are coming on scene, we forget that that is also an amazing time to plant bulbs. So just to clarify, when I'm talking about bulbs, I am talking about, in order, galanthus, our snowdrops, crocus, iris reticulata, narcissus, those are all of our daffodils, muscari, that's grape hyacinth, we've got our traditional hyacinth, tulips, fritillaria, allium, and lilies. Now, I know there are some more obscure bulbs that I have not mentioned here, but these are just some really good basics to show you the range of what you can play with. First thing I want to talk about here is color. Now, there are kind of 2 different ways that I like to examine color. The first, color as it relates to the garden as a whole, right? So what is going to coordinate in our garden? Now, bulbs are really fun because in the early seasons, say you have a garden that leans very heavy into pinks and purples. Well, in the spring, you may decide, man, this is the time of year that I crave bold reds and yellows, something really to just smack you in the face at the end of winter. You can totally do that because your perennials and your bulbs are going to be firing off at 2 completely different stations. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is color as it relates to the display as a whole. And this is also where we get to have a ton of fun. When I'm planning a color display for my bulbs or a container, really anything in the garden, there's several different ways that you can go about playing with color. And I narrow them down into 3 different categories. Our first category is playing with hues within a color. Okay, so that might be, let's just take purple for example, because a lot of people out there love purple. There's a lot of purple flowers. We can play with super deep saturated purples, like think almost like a black parrot tulip that is just like a purpley inky black, and then we can tease that out into like soft lilac-y hues. Like there's some really amazing hyacinths that are just like yummy and soft, light purple. Now, that is the first way, and that is kind of like, I call that playing with hues. I'm going to pop a color wheel up here on the screen so we can talk about the next way to play with color, and that is with analogous color. And essentially what analogous means is we have chosen buddies that exist on kind of like next door to each other on the color wheel. So think like pink and red, or yellow and orange, or maybe we're doing blues and purples. So analogous, we're choosing little buddies that are side by side on that color wheel. The last way that we get to play in Colorland is by choosing complementary colors. And these are colors that you're going to find directly across from each other on the color wheel. And so, and it's really fun to do this even in dressing too. One of my favorites is blue and orange. I love blue orange. I think it's super fun. It's super vibrant. And so what I want to challenge you to do is take a look and say, okay, what sings my song? Am I more of like a tailored, muted, we're playing with hues within the same color? Or am I going to go maybe more adventurous and go with complementary colors that are on the opposite, that feel a little bit more playful? And there's no wrong answer here. This is your garden. It is your color story. And have a good time and do what you feel is right for your home and your garden. All right. So tip number 2, zone it out. Now, I am we'll call it a hungry gardener. I love all of the things all of the time. And so I need to be really creative with how I zone my bulbs throughout my garden. And so I want to kind of encourage you to not just think of like, oh, I need to plan a color display for my entire home. Let's take a step back. That is a really ambitious goal. Maybe, let's take my garden, for example. I'm going to plan a display for my front border, what's right up against the sidewalk, what I want to greet me as I pull up to my house. Next, I'm going to maybe choose a color display for the front walkway. That's another really great zone. And because I have my boxwood hedge, the entranceway to my front door, there's a wee bit of separation there. So the colors do have to relate a little bit, but I can make a different choice. I can have a different play. Now, the dining room patio behind me, this is where I am going to play with some very different things, some colors that I'm not going to put in my front border. My dining room gets to have its own story, its own energy. And so I want you to go through your garden and think, okay, I'm feeling a red moment. Where do I want that red moment? Maybe it's like, maybe you enter by your garage. So maybe you do just a big, vibrant, in your face, reds, orange, yellow display. And that gets to be your choice there. Maybe you've got a patio that's maybe more like my kind of like my introvert patio, where you're like, oh, I really want to feel soft here. I'm going to choose a single color and play with all the different hues of that color. So tip number 2, zone it out and have a really good play in all the different zones of your garden. You don't have to do just one tulip throughout your entire home. Okay, my next tip, build on basics. Now, this world of bulbs can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. But when we're building on basics, it just kind of like sets us off in the right direction. So I want to give you a real life example of something in my garden. In my front border, I had planted a ton of tulips. It is called Triumph Continental. It is this deep kind of it's like purple with a hint of red in it. And it was actually a bulb that I had started for the 2002, is that what it was? No, 2003 Northwest Flower and Garden Festival, but they didn't come up in time. Forcing bulbs is like a whole nother ball of wax, and we won't even go there today. But because they weren't ready in time for the show, I simply popped them into my landscape, and they were beautiful. Most of them came back this past year, and again, it was a really stunning display, and I enjoyed it greatly. So that is my basic that I will be building upon this year. Likewise, I know in my front border going up to my front door, I am ready to start my initial planting of basics. And for that area, I'm going miniature white daffs. They're small, they're happy, they bloom forever, That is my basic, and I can always build from there, but I'm just choosing one basic and then building out my color story from there. Okay, so now that we have decided on a basic, I want to take you through the steps that you are going to look at when thinking, okay, I've got my basic, I'm ready to bring in a little something different. Okay, here we go. When you are building upon a basic, there are two ways that you can build upon that basic. The first is with color. So we already talked about choosing a color scheme. This is where you're going to bring in like an accent color, right? So with that deep kind of purple, I may bring in an orange. Alrighty. What I actually had planted out there was a replete daffodil, which had like a peachy center. So I had this deep, deep, deep plum and a peach, and it was actually really awesome together. The repletes have not come back very successfully, and so I'm going to maybe pivot in a different direction. So ways you can bring in color. Bring in an analogous, bring in a shade of the same color, a different hue of that color, or bring in something complementary. Now, bonus point territory is when we get into shape. This is when it gets really fun. The Continental Triumph tulip that I planted is a very classic tulip shape. Like if you ask a bunch of kids to draw a tulip, that's what they're going to draw, okay? What's fun is now I get to play with texture and all sorts of different shapes because tulips are incredibly varied. So maybe I bring in a parrot tulip. Maybe I bring in something that has more of like a fluted shape to it, something that's more in the species arena. So many different options. Likewise, if we are going with, say, a miniature white daffodil, the thing that I can then play on is like, okay, so I'm going to bring in, say, let's just use a Toto as an example. I can then bring in a giant Mount Hood. Both of them are whites. Both of them are playing in that same color arena, but I have one awesome, big, classic daffodil shape and one tiny, petite little daffodil shape. I can then double down. I can bring in another white, like White Lion, for example. And that one has a totally ruffled center. It is awesome, right? So when I pair those three together, all of a sudden I have everything within the same hue. We're all going with whites here, but suddenly I have something incredibly textured and special. So have a good play. Start with your basics and then know, okay, I can head in two directions. I can head in varying my size, and I can also head in varying my shape. So whether varying my petal formation or the actual shape of the petals in and of themselves. All right, friends, tip number 4, we are going to embrace the foliage dieback. Here's the scoop. Every year I have people asking me, oh my gosh, when can I finally cut everything back? Or what's wrong with my alliums? All of their foliage is yellowing. Here's the deal. If we're going to play in bloom territory, we have to expect the foliage dieback. And I am going to give you 2 ways that you can work with the inevitable. All right. The first tip is to embrace the use of pots. Here's what I mean. You've all seen me plant bulbs in these containers right here, and I don't want to just throw away those bulbs. In fact, those narcissus bulbs I want to repurpose in this garden. And so what I did is I actually removed all of them. I put them with soil into another pot, and I tucked that pot back in an unused space of my garden that is essentially like a holding zone. What that allows the little daffodils to do is they're still drinking in all of that beautiful sun, and it allows their foliage to die back without taking up prime real estate in a very visual area. Okay, so that is one way that you can combat the foliage using pots. The other way that you can combat the foliage dieback using pots is you simply pre-pot your bulbs, and you can literally plant that container, bulb and all, into the landscape. You just always want to make sure that you have excellent drainage. When that display is done, you simply lift out that pot, bulbs, dirt, and all, and tuck it away for them to die back in peace. And then you can kind of go on your merry way with the rest of your garden, and you don't need to worry about foliage looking yellow and gross in the garden. All right, the next way I'm going to advise you to embrace the foliage is by picking a plant friend for your bulb. And here's what I'm talking about. When we have perennials in our garden, they take up a space during the wintertime when they're all kind of like died back and dead and it looks empty. That is prime real estate for a bulb to go in. What's really fun about this is you then get to pair your bulb with a perennial that will be coming on about the same time as that foliage is dying back. So we could say planting a bunch of bulbs next to, say, a geranium, a hardy geranium. That geranium is going to start coming on to take over visual interest for all of that foliage that is dying back. So in a way, they get to almost disguise each other. It's like going incognito. The other pairing that I really love to use is alliums and grasses. I feel like they go together like peas and carrots. It is the combination to beat all combinations because as the alliums are coming up and right before they put on their best show, their foliage is looking a little bit ratty. Well, I don't have the time and the energy to be in my garden every single day, like trimming back the little yellow ends. I don't have time for it. So what I do is I plant my alliums with grasses because those grasses are coming on, they're filling in, they're covering up the yellowing foliage, and it is just looking stunning in the garden. And so it's allowing each plant to do its thing and complement each other perfectly and disguise the little bits that we don't always like to see. All right, last tip number 5 is always check your bloom times. Now, if you are new to the bulb game, you might think, okay, I'm gonna pick one tulip and I'm gonna pick one daffodil and maybe I'm gonna pick one allium. That is a fantastic way to start. But as you get your foothold a little bit further, you're going to notice that within each family of bulbs, you are going to have a huge variety of bloom times. So you're going to have early tulips, mid tulips, and late tulips. An example is my old border that I had. I had some tulip. Is it Emperor? White Emperor. It's a gorgeous white tulip with green veining that came through it. It was sensational. That entire show came up, and then as it was dying back, I had these beautiful I think it was called apricot impression. It was awesome. And those were very like classic Darwin style tulip. And so literally those emperors were gone and done. And then I had this other huge display of apricots. I mean, I had weeks of tulips. It was incredible. Same thing goes with our daffodils as well as our alliums. So what I want you to start paying attention to is when are my bulbs actually going to bloom and how can I stagger it or likewise pair it for maximum enjoyment. If you are out there shopping around and you come across a retailer who has packaged a very beautiful collection of bulbs together, I want you to read the fine print because what you're looking to determine is, are we purchasing a collection that will bloom all at once? And that is the visual impression I am going for. And therefore, this is going to be an incredible show for a shorter amount of time. Or has that bulb supplier created a collection and its purpose is to bloom over a super extended period of time? That is a very different thing because in that case, you do still want all of these bulbs to go together, but you want to understand what you're actually purchasing. Am I purchasing a short, 2-week display or am I purchasing a long 4-week display? What are we actually getting? What are we actually paying for with our money? Alrighty, so with all those tips out of the way, I want to walk you through one last thing. There's some of you out there who have never seen bulbs. Like you're going to open these things up and it's going to be a big old surprise. And so I wanted to just pull a few of the bulbs that I have on hand just to give you a little glimpse of what to expect. This first little cutie right here is a crocus. This is our little tiny crocus. She's adorable. She's tiny. This one is particularly petite. This was a no-name variety. It was originally supposed to be a yellow mammoth. It came up striped. It's probably something like Flower Record or something like that. This next one, and this is where you're going to have a variety of different shapes and sizes. This is the bulb of a Narcissus geranium. And what you can see here is this is already splitting off. And so I may actually take these apart when I'm putting them in the ground. The next one I wanted to show you is actually one that you probably don't see very often. But this, my friends, is a paper white. This paper white is actually almost like a mix between a daffodil and a hyacinth. But this is your sweet little paper white. Now, the next one is your classic tulip. It looks just like an itty bitty little teardrop and absolutely love it. And these guys, you know, once you've seen one, you kind of seen them all. This last one is just one example of an allium. Now, alliums come in a variety of shapes and sizes. You know, your drumstick alliums are going to be itty bitty, itty bitty. This one is kind of a mid-size allium bulb. And then, of course, they get much bigger from there. Kind of same thing with our daffodils. They come in a wide variety based on if you're planting a little baby tay-to-tay or something like a giant Mount Hood. And just one brief note on planting. Think of all of these bulbs as a tiny arrow, right? They've got a pointy side up, and then we've got kind of more of a flat bottom. You always plant it pointing up towards the sun. That is the advice I gave all of my little garden club kids when we were planting bulbs. The other thing is, I was on YouTube maybe last year sometime, and I saw someone literally trying to remove the wrapper from all of their bulbs before planting them. And I was like, this is not guidance we should be giving on the internet. It has this little papery outside wrapping for a reason. Throw the whole thing in. If you end up with a bunch of kind of like papery skins in the packaging, don't worry about it. But these are meant to be planted with the paper on. Okay, all that having been said, I want to walk you through my home and the current plans that I have underway for things that I will be adding. Okay, we're going to start with my front border. This is one that you've already heard me talk about. I currently have a tulip called Triumph Continental planted out there. And this is actually an area that I'm really kind of, oh, I'm actually really struggling with which direction to head. I really liked the Triumph Continental paired with my Replete Daffodil. It was lovely and so delicate, but I'm feeling the desire to go a little bit more punchy out there. So what I am playing with is I've saved all of the Narcissus geranium that I planted in my dining room containers this past spring, and I've saved them, I've dried them, and I'm considering changing that front and taking out the replete daffodil, or yeah, taking out the replete daffodils and popping in the Narcissus geranium. All right, here's the other scoop. I'm thinking of adding in another tulip. Very controversial. They have somehow survived out there, and I'm not exactly sure why, but the bunnies haven't gotten to them. So in that front border, I'm thinking of bringing in a tulip called Slawa. It's Slawa. I had seen it online, I think in something that Sarah Raven was doing, and I just kind of went bananas for it. It has the same depth of tone that the Triumph Continental has, but it's a slightly more kind of like fluted shape, and it is bicolor. So the edge of the petal is orange, which I think will coordinate really, really well with the Narcissus geranium. So the more I think about it, the more I think that is the direction I'm gonna head. Still a little bit TBD, but I feel like I'm narrowing in on what that's gonna look like. The next area, oh, the other thing I wanted to do is I was thinking of bringing in a hyacinth that I used in the Flower and Garden show, not this past year, but the year before. It's a hyacinth called Woodstock. It is so gorgeous, and I thought it might be fun to have a little bit more scent, especially as people are walking by the house and I'm approaching the front door, because I think scent is such a beautiful way to greet people. All right, the next area that I'm going to be developing is the front walkway to my front door. If you've watched some of my previous spring tours, I showed you a daffodil that I already have planted out here. And it's kind of along the sides, not necessarily along the main walkway, but it is a daffodil called Petticoat White. And it is so stinking cute. It is so stinking cute. It's a little tiny hoop skirt, and the little petals that go all the way around are these little tiny spikes. And it's adorable. It is adorable. It's woodland and sweet and lovely, and it's fresh too. And there's something about it that I really loved because I can just go bananas with color in my pots and there's no fighting it. And I like in the spring to have a good play in these containers, and I think that'll be really fun. So all that having been said, what I'm considering adding is a daffodil called Toto. Toto is very similar to Thalia. So either one will do. I'll just see what I can get my hands on, but they're just the most petite, adorable daffodils, very grassy, textured leaves, and it just blooms forever and ever. So that is the immediate plan for out here. If I were to do anything else, I might plant a couple of baby pockets of Iris reticulata because I love Iris reticulata. I think it is so sensational and it does kind of pick up on the blue of my accent pots. So it might be kind of a fun one to bring in. So that's the plan for front walkway. Okay, last but not least is the dining room border around me. I played with a couple different things this past year. I actually only had just a handful of an allium, it's allium bulgaricum. Now this one I need to refresh my notes. It's Sicilian honey garlic, but they've just reclassified it, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but I'm going to say it anyways. Nectaro scordum. Nectaro scordum? Maybe that's it? Unknown. But it used to be classified in the allium family. It's called honey bells. It's just very, very, very sweet and delicate. And I played with just a couple out here, and I really enjoyed it. And so I made kind of a mental note that I would be purchasing more for the dining room for the next year ahead because it incorporated a lot of different colors. It also incorporated a lot of that kind of rosy tone of the celestial night rose that is blooming behind me. The next thing that I want to add out here that I want to play with is a Fritillaria persica. And this Fritillaria persica is like deep in drama, and I just want to play with it. You know, I haven't played with it in this garden yet, and I think it could be really stunning in some grasses. So that is one that I am looking at. The other thing that I'm thinking of bringing into this garden in particular is a drumstick allium. I love a drumstick allium, and I feel like you don't see them enough. They're beautiful actually as a cut flower. I love that you get a lot of depth of color. Sometimes they're bicolor even, like a little green, a little kind of like purpley red, and then they'll all go. And it's just a really, really fun one. I used to have them down in the cut flower garden, and I miss them. So I'm going to bring some up here. And I think it really goes with the color palette that I've established for my midsummer story out here. The last thing that I'm considering bringing into this garden is kind of one that is a bit of a love obsession from this past year. I really fell hard for Camassia. Now, Camassia is one of our natives here in the Northwest. It was used as a food source for our native people, and it is beautiful, but it's purple, which doesn't necessarily go with the vibe out here for kind of when it would be blooming. So I was doing some research online, and there is like a false Camassia, which is not edible. Um, Poisonous, I'm pretty sure. But it is a white Camassia. And I was thinking, I might try that in my garden to see how it goes because it's like a little tiny column of star shaped blooms. And I just find it to be delightful. And I thought, you know, I love to have a good play. I love to try something new. So I'm going to find some pocket up here that I think I'm going to try those in because I really enjoyed seeing it this past year, and it just grabbed my eye, especially down at the waterfront in Seattle. They played with a bunch of Camassia plantings, and I just loved it. I thought it was so fun. Friends, thank you so much for coming along. I hope this was helpful. Now, a lot of people are already snatching up those bulbs. So if you have your heart set on a specific one, you better race to the internet as we speak and purchase it up because the best time to actually purchase bulbs is when they're actually flowering. So that would have been last year in say March, April, May. But the second best time is right this very second. So if you have bulbs that you've grown that you've just absolutely loved, drop them down in the comments because I think it is so fun to read what you guys are attracted to and ones that you've had really great success with. The other thing I was going to say is that when you are looking at certain bulbs and you want to plant your stuff one time and you want to forget about it and you want it to keep on going for years to come, I want you to look for bulbs that say they are naturalizing. That should be like final like bonus tip. Look for bulbs that say they are naturalizing because a lot of times if you have a large property, you want to set it once and just let Mother Nature do her thing. I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to see you in the next one. And in the meantime, please say hello to your garden for me.